Hey folks, Steve here with another Reluctant Enemies OCS video for you today. We're going to kick things off, and we'll get things rolling here pretty quickly. I won't do too much intro other than to say I am going to be very closely following the OCS starter guide, my printed version of the errated one that is available out on the OCS Depot website. Um, this being by Chip and then edited by Curtis Bayer. Um, Chip does a really good job of talking through the system and how everything works, and so much so, in fact, that I'm going to be following along his strategy um, as the Commonwealth at the very least. To get things started, I think there is always a level of uh, analysis paralysis when I look at an OCS game when I've opened things up in Vassal, because there's a lot of units out there, and it's not always immediately uh, understandable like what's even a good move to do. And so I'm basically going to do what he does in that starter guide in terms of what happens on the table. Because I'm going to be rolling dice, I'm inevitably going to get different results than he got, very likely. And so we're going to have to veer away from what he describes in that starter guide probably pretty quickly, just as soon as the dice get rolling. But it was useful to understand kind of how should we get started, where should we focus our effort, and he does do a very good job of kind of describing why. So that much easy peasy. When we are looking to actually get started for the scenario itself, the turn order, I believe we we do start as the Commonwealth in the scenario. Let me double check. Yeah, first player is the Commonwealth, so they're going to get to go first. Now, um, I think the very first thing we need to do, if I look at the, oh, this game doesn't have the sequence of play on the front of the playbook. Okay. Um, we would do ordinarily, if this were a different OCS game, we would do weather. There is no weather in this game because the weather was all, it didn't affect operations heavily, so we skipped that. Now I'm looking at the the game charts for the series here. So weather, we already know who's the first player. Next, we would do aircraft refit. The only aircraft on the board right now for the Commonwealth is in an off-map holding box representing bases that are further off the map but within range. There's a fighter as well as a tactical bomber. Both of those air units are already active, so there's no need to do refit. And then we would have the reinforcement phase. And so we will need to roll for that, and we may end up with something different from what Chip got. But what we're going to do, um, let's see. So we're going to roll on the Commonwealth supply table, which is located further down on the map, but I also have this extra sheet over here. So we're going to roll two dice. I'm going to use my regular sided dice, or regular sized dice for this. We'll roll. And I rolled a 10, which should be pretty good. And we get 3 supply points and 2 supply tokens. So that's basically 3.5, which is quite good. I think let's see, what did he get? Oh, he rolled a 10 as well. That's weird. Okay, maybe we will be much like Chip. And he's putting 1 supply point in Amman and then 2.5 in Haifa. I think that's certainly a very reasonable approach here. So I think I'm going to do the same. So 1 in Amman, and then, boy, that's a lot. 2.5. 2.5 in Haifa, which, just to show, one supply point is equal to 4 tokens. So when we say 2.5, that's 1 supply point, 2 supply point, and then half, which is actually 2t, 2 tokens. So those will go into Haifa as well. And I do have a truck over here. I just need to be careful to note they're loaded. So I can probably simplify this a little bit. The one thing I do notice you kind of have to mess with a little bit here is the making change bits. So you may have to shuffle around, your SP markers with your tokens. Sometimes it's easier to just have 1 or 2 supply points in a hex as tokens because it's just easier to manage, I've found. So got to deal with that a little bit. So that was good. And then we're also going to roll on the replacement table. So another 2 dice. We'll see how well we do for this. And I rolled a 7. So that's better than what Chip got. And with a 7, the die roll is better, but we still get nothing for that. So Commonwealth doesn't get anything more for that. All good. And then we also need to roll for the availability of our naval barrage units. So during the reinforcement phase, which technically we are still in, we're going to determine availability for each naval barrage unit eligible for that term. We're going to roll a die. On a 3 to 6, the naval barrage unit is available. Turn the unit from fired to its barrage side. I guess I need to... I don't have them flip to their fired side, but I should do that. But let's just figure this out. We're basically just going to roll for each one. So we'll roll for the destroyers. We want 3 to 6. We got it. And then we'll roll for the cruisers. And we don't get that one. We don't get the cruisers. So they're going to be on their fired side. We did get the destroyers. Then I'll make the Vichy naval unit fired. So we only have access to one of our naval units as the Commonwealth, and it is the weaker destroyers barrage unit. So good to go there. Now with that complete, we are now going to go over to movement. And the thing, if you're not familiar with the sequence of play or understanding how this works, you will do combat very often in movement as compared to combat, depending on where you're at, and even exploitation. So in this game, there's a concept known as overrun, and it's basically doing combat as part of movement, and it can be dangerous. The rule of thumb that I've seen is, and like this isn't secret information, this is in the rule books and various books. If you have superior tactical ratings, that means you will have a better chance of achieving surprise on an overrun. And so generally, if you've got the movement points and good tactical ratings, you're going to want to overrun a lot of the time, assuming you can make the odds work and the terrain's not bad and all these sorts of things. You will want to do overruns. They're valuable. You can make that work. And the thing to keep in mind is you could have combat as part of movement as an overrun, and then there's also the normal combat segment, which you could potentially still be doing more attacks at that point, I believe. So during this movement phase, it's not as though we're just going to move stuff. We're going to stop, and then we're going to do combat later, like many Hex and Counter War games for World War II. We have to think about, are we actually going to have any combats as part of movement? It is now that is the time to be shooting guns, not in a separate phase, though we will still have that separate phase. What's important to understand is these movement based combats, these overruns are going to occur before the opponent's reaction um, phase. So whenever we're done moving, we're going to check supply, but then there's going to be a reaction phase, and it will allow uh, enemy units that are in reserve mode, which is a whole thing that we haven't mentioned really, but reserve is a mode that some units can be in. Units that are in reserve mode on the opponent side can move and can respond potentially before we have regular combat. And after regular combat, then there's an exploitation phase, which involves movement, which means, yes, indeed, you could have potentially more overruns and then more regular combats. So when we talk about a single turn, right, there's the old paradigm of I go, you go, but within even a player turn in OCS, there's a I go and then maybe you go a little bit and then I go some more, and then the reverse occurs on the other player's turn. So there is plenty of back and forth where it's not simply I move anything and everything and then you move everything and anything. There is a little bit more complexity to it, and it's based on the mode that your units are in. And very usually, the modes that you're going to see on a unit are either going to be, and I'm just going to grab this guy as an example. He's in combat mode, which is usually the front of the counter, and then on the reverse is movement mode. So these aren't step losses when you flip these guys, but 3 combat power, 5 movement. But if we swapped him to movement mode, he's now weaker, but he can go much farther. And there are kind of modified versions of these modes. So there's also strat move mode where you put this marker on them, and they're basically having extended movement. There's certain penalties for doing it. There's exploitation, which means that they're able to exploit, or they're given this marker to show what they can do as an exploit. There's disorganized, which is a DG marker, and that gets placed on a unit that's become disorganized from artillery fire or various things that could happen. And then finally, there is the reserve mode, which each side has a limited number of these reserve markers that you would place on a unit and basically say, like, okay, now that it's my reaction turn, I can move in response to the Commonwealth to a certain degree, or I can release them from being in reserve to do something in my exploitation phase kind of thing. So this is another one of those things that it's not just what you see is what you get on the board. There's a strategic consideration of just the supply, but then what kind of posture are the units in? Are they in good order? Have they not been disorganized? Okay, good. Are they oriented for combat, meaning they're a little more deployed? They can't move as far, but they can fight better, versus, hey, we're on the move, we're running and gunning, and there's costs to all of that. And then the strategic use of the reserve markers that are really set up so that you can exploit a break or gap in the enemy lines, but you kind of have to have it pre-planned by actually utilizing those few number of reserve markers. So there's a whole little thing there. So just to say, when I say, hey, I'm going to do movement next, or during this series, if I say, okay, so-and-so is up for movement, you need to understand I'm not simply moving units. I am potentially also conducting combats. So each and every phase has the potential to be very chock full of die rolls and all that good fun stuff. So keep that in mind.
Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with a bang here, and let's try to do the same thing that our dear friend Chip did, and do an overrun on the cavalry unit here, sitting at Fiek. I assume it's Fiek, but I don't know. Shame to say. So this particular unit, 3 combat strength, 3 tactical rating, 5 move. If it ever were to flip back over to its movement side, it would have 10 movement. So, fast moving units are dangerous in this game due to the roads. If they manage to achieve breakthrough, they can be running down the roads very quickly. The Commonwealth wants to avoid that. If one of those fast movers gets into really any of those victory cities, that could be a victory for Vichy. So yeah, it does make sense to try to knock these guys out. So the way that Chip tries to do it, which I think we'll go ahead and try ourselves, is we're going to have the armor unit here remain in combat mode. We're going to have the unit here moved to movement mode, so it has the most movement. And understanding that an overrun actually costs additional movement points to execute. So you need, the reason why you're going to end up doing overruns with units flipped over to their movement side is that the tax for an overrun on movement points almost requires those units to have as high a movement factors as is really possible, and that tends to mean they've got to flip over to their movement side. So they're going to start their movement together. We're going to leave this guy behind in Telor. And the way this should work is we're going basically 1, 2, 3, 4, and then make sure I get this right. I'm sorry. 1, 2, 3, and the reason why it's 1, 2, 3 here is it's one movement to get to here. It's clear terrain. One still along this track, and then 1, 2, and then 3 to here. So while there's this terrain is technically low hills, and there is an escarpment hex side, which is normally impassable, prohibited, there is a road that runs through it, which allows passage. So 1, 2, 3 to get to here, and then they're going to spend 3 movement points coming into the hex here for the overrun attack itself. Now I've already kind of not done the right thing here because one of these units is motorized. So white print is leg movement, which does not cost fuel. But if it were black movement, and you see the numbers in black over here for this HQ, that is truck movement, which is motorized, which requires supply expenditure. And then so does the red here, which is tracked movement, but that is still motorized. So we have to actually have paid supply to get that unit to move. We have to fuel it up for it. So if I look at where that unit was, it would have been, so just talking it through, it started here, right? And it could have gotten supply from Ereb down here. I'm so sorry, guys. I'm like trying to get my head straight. This HQ can throw supply because it's 1, 2, 3, 4.5, which is well within the 8 of that HQ. So we need to spend the 1 token to fuel that guy up. And of course, I have foolishly not broken this down, so I'll need to do that. But so imagine what we really need to have here is, and I'm sure I'm not going to be able to find the right change that I really want. So down to 2 supply points and 3 tokens in Ereb. And technically I even need to change this because there is a truck unit here that I have loaded up, but I guess I should just do that right now and fix that. So
There you go. So the truck is loaded up. Okay. You can start to see why some people are reluctant to get into this series when you're fiddling with counters like this for supply. But there you go. So we supplied, we threw that supply. This guy got fueled up. They moved together. So this was a mnemonic, but they had to move together for this overrun. So we paid the supply for fueling first, and then they moved up. And now we can actually look to pay the combat supply. Um, so that's going to be the other part of it. So we're going to have to pay basically 1 token for each step that's attacking. So that's 2. Let's see if we can, like, where does it make the most sense? I think we can pay for it from, let's see, where does it make the most sense? I think we can still do it from Ereb. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yes, they still can. So we could very simply pay it again from the dump. I'm having to make some change here, which is, always a little annoying to deal with, but I paid the 2 tokens from here being able to be thrown all the way up from that same HQ. So these guys have combat supply. This guy has to pay combat supply too as the defender. And this is where the defender gets a little bit more supply efficiency, which makes sense. So if you have a 1-step unit, if you have less than a regimental equivalent, you just pay 1, which is what we have here. We have 1 step. We're going to end up paying 1 token out of their supply dump here. If we had 2 steps, then or 2 regimental equivalents, or equal to, we could be paying up to 2 supply points. If we have a lot more units than that, a lot more steps, we're still, I believe, only paying 2 supply, or I'm sorry, 2 tokens of supply to defend. A maximum of 2, it looks like in the rules. So, if you're attacking with a whole bunch of stuff, you can actually be spending huge amounts of supply, and the defender might be defending with a whole bunch of stuff, but they're still only spending 2 supply. And I think what that incentivizes is you want to be careful of just throwing everything in, because if you fail, or you're going to have to make a risk management decision there, you could throw a lot of supply away, maybe not succeed in what you're doing, or maybe you have done that, but if the enemy still has units and still has supply, they may get a supply advantage over you for the counterattack over time. So something to think about. As it stands, though, we're going to have, or you know what, I bet if I flip this over, yep, that's a 3 token. So we spend the 1 token for this guy, so that is his defending supply. And now we're ready to actually do the combat. And the way that this is going to work is, I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. We're going to have to pick a lead unit. So this is going to be the unit that we're going to use the tactical rating for, but is also the one that is going to be the most hurt in the combat result. And we're going to use our cavalry, which has a 4 compared to a 3. And this guy can only use the 1 unit that's there. So that's 3. So the allies have an advantage of 4 to 3 in this case, which gives them a +1. Now we also want to look at terrain, and you might say, well, the combat is in clear terrain, so does it really, what's the deal with terrain? Well, it does matter even for the attacker, because clear terrain actually provides a bonus to armor. So
If we look at the terrain effects chart, I'll use this sheet of paper that I printed for this. You can see in open, armor has a ×2. The brackets denote affecting attack strength only. So on the attack, armor is twice as strong in open terrain, but only if it's attacking. If it's defending, it retains the same base value. So this is why it's okay in some cases that an armor unit might be in movement mode, because it's going to get a lot of strength back in the open. So as it stands, this unit is actually a 6 strength unit in the open, and this cavalry remains a 2, but that does have an 8. So the combat odds, and again, ultimately this is lining up very well with the starter guide that Chip wrote. We're going to have 8-3, do the way that OCS does rounding. That is actually treated as 3-1 odds. So this is a much looser rounding, and it is probably attacker favored rounding for this sort of thing. But so there you go. We've got our +1 die roll modifier to our die rolls because of the AR difference between the tank. I'm not sorry, not the tank. Our cavalry and the enemy cavalry. So that's going to apply both to the combat die roll as well as the surprise die roll, which is important. So what we're going to do here is we're going to roll our 3 dice, or I'm sorry, our 5 dice, because again we're going to do supply all at once, and then we'll be looking at the results chart. And what I want to show you is open terrain is very clearly open, but what you can see is that some types of terrain could end up be considered close, very close, or extremely close, and you can see the equivalence in terms of odds. So attacking somebody at let's say 1-to-1, oh boy, it's kind of interesting the way that the numbers work out. But if you were attacking somebody at 1-to-1 in open terrain, that could be just as bad as you'd need 2-to-1 in close terrain to have the same odds as even 1-to-1. You'd need 3-to-1 in very close. You would need 4-to-1 and extra close. So you having 4 times as much as your opponent in extreme terrain, extremely close terrain, is the same as if you were fighting them out in the open 1-to-1, and it gets harder. So basically, open terrain is convenient and good for us right now, but you could imagine, if you're attacking in more difficult terrain, even calculating all the strength odds, even calculating where units are going to get doubled or halved or whatever due to terrain, then the type of terrain goes even further to calculate those odds on the chart that functionally your results are going to be worse in extremely close terrain, is what that really means typically. So something to keep in mind. So I'm going to roll my 5 mini dice for the combat, and not that it matters for you, but I'm using the black dice for surprise, the white dice for combat results, and the red die for the number of shifts that would occur for surprise. And we're going to roll off and see what we get. Okay, so I'm going to have to look to see if this is surprise, because it's on the knife edge. And I got to look in the rule book or wait, maybe it's here. Overrun attack. Attacker gains surprise on a 9 or more. So this isn't the combat charts. Here we go. Overrun 9 or more. It's going to be hard to see. The attacker gains surprise if it's 6 or less. Then the defender gains surprise. If it is 7 or 8, then there's basically no surprise. And there was no surprise because we got a 7 for a total of 7
for the surprise. So there is the shifts don't matter. There is no surprise. So we're already not maybe doing as good as we could have gotten maybe. But this is the average die roll. So if you figure the probability curve, 2d6 average should be about 7 plus 1 is 8. On average we would not have gotten surprise here. But yeah, so we didn't get surprised. The shifts don't matter. I rolled an 8 for combat, and we get a +1 for 9. And if we're looking at 3 to 1 in the open, a 9 result is attacker option 1, and a defender loses 1 with an option of 1. So this is actually the same result that Chip got, I think, in the play. So DL, what's going to happen is these guys have to have an option of either losing a step or retreating a step. We're going to go ahead and have them retreat a step. I think that's fine. Much as Chip did. But then the defender has to lose 1, so they lose this unit. It is dead, and I'll need some way to be tracking losses and doing the replacement loss calculations. But and then the remaining option on the result doesn't matter. So just to show this again, so you understand what I'm saying. If it's a attacker option 1, that's what that means. Attacker option 1, lose a step or retreat 1 hex, and then the defender has to lose 1, and then they have an option. So if there was 2 units there as the Vici, they'd lose 1 step, and they'd have to decide to either lose the other step or retreat. You would almost imagine if there were 2, they'd have to retreat, right? Only if you had even more steps there would that result, would the option really, really matter there. And for the attacker, obviously, unless holding the hex is really important, so wanting to advance because we are willing to sacrifice a unit, you would maybe take the step loss and then have the remaining step continue to advance. I think right now, because there's not that many units on the board, period, not taking the step loss is prudent. And that's what Chip did, so I'm going to go with what Chip did. And there we go. So these guys are done, and I'm just going to, they're done for movement at the very least. And that's our first combat. So that felt really complicated to explain, and in some ways, I guess it is. I mean, let's not act like this isn't a very involved system, but I think it's important to kind of show the way that works. So, keep in mind, like that is movement for these guys. If for some reason there were any other enemy units around them, they could attack later, and we didn't get a result good enough to put them in an exploit. But the other thing is, like, this guy technically could actually activate, and he could go, let's say we put him into move mode. 1, 2, 3, 4, and we could capture that supply depot, and then I'm not sure what I would do from there. Like, I would maybe retreat back or something, so that, if we want to take the supply away, because we're going to have a supply advantage over Vici anyway, just get it and run away, so that if the Vici move down here, they're not going to be able to use the supply, they're going to take it back. And eventually, like this, the way that capturing supply works is that you lose some of it, I think, every time it's captured. Or we could take it and then blow the dump and try to destroy that supply so that nobody could use it. So there's a couple of things there where, like, we can not worry too much about, like, we've got the road. Clearly we've got these guys blocking this road,
If for some reason the Vici try to come down here, I don't think they're going to do that. We could run up, take this, maybe get into another position here, um, close to the crossroads. We could actually go up to the crossroads and impose a threat. And the real problem the whole time for these guys is that they're really not in a great position to come down here. The Vici HQs, it's like 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this guy is in uh, combat supply throw, but if he moves beyond, then he's going to start to have problems. And so I don't expect this guy to come down here, to do much if we capture that supply depot off camera. This guy, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8. Boy, that sucks for them. One, two. Even this guy really is not, and he's reliant on some supply that's down near Dara. So there's a whole bunch of challenging supply situations here where um, they just don't have a lot of options as the VG. So that's going to factor into this. Now, I just realized I've spent now a huge amount of time talking through the whole sequence of events here. I do think it was important to kind of talk about like what's important here, because what you want to do not only just defeat your enemy, but you want to disrupt their supply. How far can they trace supply? Where are they getting supply from? Where could you cut supply off? And as Chip notes in the starter guide, this hex right here, Ezra, is super important, because if you cut this line, any other Vici units out here are going to be reliant on this supply, which is not much, or the supply dump that's right here on the right edge of the screen. I'm going to be relying on eating off the map to that hex, and that supply is going to drift away pretty quick, and they're not going to be able to get supply through this crossroads either on the rail line or the road line, because then it's just track, and it's just functionally you're not getting the movement advantage needed to the truck movement point advantage needed for the supply to really flow well to those units. And if you do that right, let's think operationally for a second. If you have disrupted those local supply tracing issues, what it does is it forces those units to basically either retreat back towards Damascus in the north, or fight it out bitterly, but knowing that it's just a holding action, and those guys are going to be lost kind of no matter what. So that's the strategy thinking here. The crisscrossing of the roads are not simply to show ways to get units places faster, but actually matter for how are you going to get the ammunition and the food and everything else to the guys that need it. As soon as you start cutting those things off, then it becomes a pretty significant issue. A pretty significant issue indeed. And even Zocs are going to prove a challenge. So this is one of the peculiarities of the system, that leg movement can largely ignore Zocs for certain things, but truck definitely cannot. Truck gets impacted by Zocs very easily. So most of the HQs on the board, in fact, all of them for Vici in particular, use truck movement. Most HQs will use truck movement. There are some exceptions to that in different games. So if you're able to use your Zocs to cut off these supply lines, then that's another easy way that can cause disruption. In addition to grabbing the crossroads, the Zocs will matter. So that's sort of the name of the game. Now, I've spent a huge amount of time talking through this. This is going to mean that like this very first video in the series is meant mostly to demonstrate a combat and an overrun combat at that, and kind of talk very lightly about the way that the game works.
So that's not necessarily what I wanted, but I think it was important to talk through this. Um, Before I wrap up this video, and I think I'm going to keep this video shorter just because it for real, like we're not even really covering turn one very much. Um, to point out that there are the trucks out there. We get to place those trucks. Those trucks can start loaded, which sometimes in many games and scenarios the trucks cannot start loaded. But the idea is those trucks are in places, they're loaded up with some of the supply that starts in those locations, like Ereb and Haifa, so that this turn, this very movement turn, if we want, we can take those trucks, we can bring supply forward, and we can drop them, and then we can take those trucks and very likely start driving them back to the supply depot. So already, that importance of where are the trucks, they can go ahead and load up supply and move them up and drop them somewhere, is really important. And what will tend to happen is, let's see if I can just grab one of these trucks as an example. You're reading that right. That is 45 truck movement points. 45 truck movement points, which is a lot when you think about, how far can you go. We've been largely talking about movement in terms of like 10 or 12, or tracing 10 to 12 truck movement points, but 45 is enough to, you got to spend a little bit of movement loading the truck if it wasn't loaded, and you've got to spend a little bit of it unloading the truck when you get to a destination. But you can, sure enough, take that truck, if it's already filled, great. Drive it, 5 movement points, spend a couple movement points to drop off the supply, drive even further along somewhere else, pick up some more, drive somewhere else and drop it off, all within spending 45 movement points in a turn. And so when you think about that, it does mean you have a pretty wide latitude as long as you have the roads to use it. You can be zipping around the map quite a bit, right? If you figure main roads are half a movement point, and let's just say let's remove the loading and unloading for a second, you're still talking about like 90 hexes of movement in a given player turn. So zipping back and forth across the map, moving those supply points around is also very important in figuring out where do you think the next supply depot probably should be if you're assuming you're going to have offensive action, um, out to this area or whatever, and that will mean, that maybe you're going to have to transport supply to places where there's not an HQ. And what does that look like? That means you've got to put the supply within 5 movement points of the units, to use them. If they're not going to be thrown, they need direct draw, and that's 5 movement points. It's not very much when you start talking about terrain, if terrain matters. So it would seem like, oh, this is a relatively simple game that's going to play very fast if you're just looking at the map. If this was SCS, that would be true. In OCS, man, you got to really sit there and think it through. There's a lot to think about, and I'm sure it's easy to get it wrong, which I think certainly lends itself to an experienced player, and one who's really thought through the situation, or maybe has studied the maps a lot and have done all the calculus needed on it, will do much better than somebody who's just looking at it for the first time, and that is kind of me in this case. So if there are OCS experts who watch this series and go, Steve, what the hell are you doing? You can tell me. Remember that I am not an expert on this system. I'm still trying to figure it out. So I'm going to make some silly mistakes, I am sure. But let me know. Feel free to put your strategic operational commentary in the comment section. I would appreciate that to help me in my journey get better and better and better. So with that, I think I'm gonna call this video, because it's already super duper long for what I intended, for the amount of content I wanted to show. In the next video, I am going to stop commentating to this degree of each. We've really only moved 2 units. We've got a whole map of units to be looking at. I'm going to do much of that off camera. So we'll show the aftermath of various things as we go, but I can't show everything to this detail. But this was an obvious example that does line up pretty well with the starter guide to show on camera to describe how that ought to work and its importance in the larger scheme of the operation. So thanks for watching, guys. We'll show more and we'll get through more in the next video, I promise. I appreciate you watching and kind of seeing me dipping my feet into the water here. Experts, let me know what you think. Interested to get your feedback. So take care, guys. Keep on gaming. We'll see you in the next one.